Treasure HD's City Guides hits the pavement to seek out distinctive architecture and history in the urban landscape. Local guides share the folklore and highlight the design of buildings to bring neighborhoods to life. From Romanesque revival to modernism, discover the fascinating architecture, old and new, that frames cities all over the world. Buffalo, New York ranks as one of the poorest cities in the United States. Over the last 6 decades, an economic downturn stunted growth in manufacturing jobs and population. Instead, abandoned homes line the streets of the East Side, and urban decay is a very real problem. But venturing into the downtown core is to be taken back to Buffalo's golden age of architecture. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, Buffalo was at the frontier of industrial innovation with the thriving Erie Canal. It was also a city of architectural innovation. The prosperity of a flourishing economy attracted some of the best and brightest architects to build this city from the ground up. From one of the most influential office buildings in the world to the epic Art Deco City Hall, this was a city to behold. As Buffalo strives to find ways to redefine itself in a changing economy, the face of its downtown still stands proudly as a testament to its glory days. City Guides takes a closer look at Buffalo, New York, perched on the shores of Lake Erie, to take a look at the architectural treasures in its downtown core, which is bordered by Elmwood Street to the west, Tupper Street to the north, Oak Street to the east, and Seneca Street to the south.
We're here on top of a 10-story high parking ramp in Buffalo, New York, downtown Buffalo, overlooking a significant patch of urban real estate. What we have in downtown here is a very interesting illustration of what was happening in Buffalo in architecture and the economy. We have a small building, 3-story high building, presently housing the Washington Square Tavern, built in the 1850s before the Civil War. And then across the street, wham, a huge building, 10 stories high. It occupies a full block of land.
Considered a local wonder, the Ellicott Building was the largest office building in the world when it was completed. It was designed in a Beaux-Arts style by Daniel Burnham, one of the most famous architects of the era. His firm, D.H. Burnham & Company, was the largest architectural firm in the U.S. at the time of his death in 1912. The Beaux-Arts elements on the Ellicott Building involve heavy ornamentation on the facade, such as the decorative keystones, cornice, and dentile. With the combination of the steel frame and the newly improved safety elevator, architects were able to envision buildings reaching new heights.
What we see on Ellicott Square here is a 10-story high building that's really shorter buildings pancaked one on top of the other. So if you look at Ellicott Square, you'll see a 2-story base and then a 4-story central core. You'll see the large arches on that building, and then a succession of smaller buildings leading up to the full 10-story height. One of the problems presented by this new type of building was, how do people know where to get in? And Burnham, what he did for this building, it's like he took a giant cleaver and lopped off the front of a palazzo in Florence and pasted it on front of the Ellicott Square. When you're looking at it, you're saying, wow, that's great carved stone, but it in fact is brick and terracotta painted to look like stone. And then as we go into the building, we're going by the banks of the famous elevators that are now electrically powered. Buffalo, the first city in the world to get alternating current electricity. These elevator cars are wonders of technology, and they're wonderful brass doors, and they depict the history of Buffalo.
As you enter the building, the space opens up into a grand interior courtyard. An enormous skylight hovers 2 stories above the courtyard. There are 2 curved stairwells on opposite ends with elaborate cast iron railings leading to a second-floor balcony. The flooring is made of Italian marble and was designed using various sun motifs.
So at Ellicott Square, tall office building, but kind of a old type of design. Louis Sullivan gets a commission around the same time to do another office building in Buffalo, and he says, you know what, we're at a dead end here architecturally in Buffalo here. I'm going to design a building which emphasizes the fact that it's a tall building. Okay, we're in front of one of my favorite buildings, Louis Sullivan's Guarantee Building of 1895 on the corner of Pearl and Church Streets in downtown Buffalo. Kind of the first fully realized modern building.
Louis Sullivan made his mark early in his career as a theater architect. He went on to become one of the most influential forces in the Chicago School of Architecture. He coined the phrase, "Form follows function," which became the motto behind modern architecture. Sullivan went on to design the skyscraper, which was a uniquely American building type. Armed with a great aspiration for new heights, Sullivan felt this particular structure deserved a fresh approach.
Sullivan took an elemental part of architecture, the post and the beam, and in this steel frame building, he takes the spandrels and recesses them into the building. So when you look at the building with the sun on it, you're going to see the piers rocket straight up to the full height of the building until they're stopped by a very large, emphatic, but beautiful curved cornice, which tops off the building.
The steel frame structure is sheathed in an intricately carved terracotta curtain. Although there is no real structural purpose for this curtain wall, it does provide protection from the weather while creating a warm decorative surface. Sullivan drew on his cultural roots by using Celtic symbols combined with Art Nouveau imagery.
What's interesting about this building is it's been wonderfully restored down to the original light fixtures that existed in the 1890s. This building, it's a National Historic Landmark, which is the highest honor a building can have in the United States. It's featured in every Architecture 101 textbook around the world. It was a very advanced way of thinking, and in fact, it was so advanced, Sullivan never got a commission to do a tall office building again in his career. We can contrast the Guarantee Building with the Dunn Building right down the street by local architectural luminary E.B. Green of 1894.
Edward B. Green had a lengthy career spanning 72 years and prospered as the partner in the architectural firm of Green & Wicks. The neoclassical Buffalo Savings Bank and the Byzantine-inspired First Presbyterian Church are but 2 examples of his 160 buildings that still survive in Buffalo. Although not a visionary when it came to new designs like Frank Lloyd Wright or Louis Sullivan, Green embraced and mastered classical design. His imprint across Buffalo firmly established him as one of the city's urban legacies.
Here we have the Dunn Building, 1894, a very tall building, kind of an interesting shape, tall and narrow. He uses some steel in the structure to reinforce it because a lot of wind is coming off the lake. The detailing of this is classic architecture as interpreted by l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which was a very influential architectural school. So you're going to see arches, you're going to see some Greek-style windows. What we see here again is the inability for these historic styles to design a building of more than 4 stories.
At the time of its completion, the Dunn Building was the first high-rise in Buffalo, reaching 10 stories. It foreshadowed the next 10 years in which structures like the Ellicott Square building and the Guarantee Building redefined the cityscape. These structures were not just a response to the growing need for office space, but a clear statement about the progress and unprecedented growth of the city. Up next, City Guides gets a look at the restored electric tower and a forerunner to the modern shopping mall. From soaring buildings to colorful neighborhoods and proud civic structures, Buffalo has a surprising range of significant architecture. They are structures from another era when Buffalo prospered and its people were busy building the American dream. But modern-day Buffalo has a serious image problem. Over decades of poor economic conditions, citizens migrated out of the city in droves to look for work, leaving a multitude of abandoned, neglected buildings in their wake. Some of these buildings are now getting a second chance. Preservation efforts are underway to ensure the character of the city remains intact. One such example is the stunning electric tower.
We're in front of what for a long time Buffalonians knew as the Niagara Mohawk Power Corporation headquarters, now simply an office building known as the Electric Tower. It was built in 1912 by the esteemed local architectural firm of Eisenwine and Johnson, a dominant Buffalo firm of the late 19th century, early 20th. A couple interesting features of this building. One is the site. It's on a triangular site, so one of the things that the architect has to do is figure out, how do I get a certain square footage of office space on this site? Well, you're dealing with a triangular site, mark it with a tower. The other interesting thing about the building is the white glazed terracotta. Of course, fits perfectly with buildings in the classical style, because if we think of ancient Greek buildings, we're thinking of white marble. A really nice detail that's fairly conspicuous here is the use of decorative swags, of course rendered in this glazed terracotta, bowing from certain sections of the buildings, garlands of fruits and leaves and festoons draped over the walls. So this is kind of a white terracotta confection. It rises in tiers and then finally is surmounted by an internally lit lantern.
A source of inspiration behind the design came from the original electric tower that was built during Buffalo's Pan American Exposition of 1901. As you enter the interior, further evidence of restoration is visible in the main lobby. This two-story lobby had undergone many modifications, losing its original charm. Now the true character has been reclaimed, opening up the second-floor balcony. Many of the Art Deco features were either restored or replicated, such as the decorative molding. Eisenwine and Johnson successfully inserted a building into a challenging triangular slot, crowning a dramatic intersection with its wedding cake-like structure.
We're right now in E.B. Green's Market Arcade that was built in the mid-1890s in Buffalo. And what's interesting about this building is the building type. It's a shopping arcade which connects two streets, Main Street with Washington Street.
The arcade as a building type was considered the precursor to the modern shopping mall. The first two floors with their large window fronts were designed for shops, with the third floor designated as offices. At the time it was built, there was a giant open-air market called the Washington Market, located adjacent from the arcade. With well over 400 stalls, this area was bustling with activity. Arcades became quite popular in the United States, but they were nothing new in European cities like Paris, Naples, and London, where they've been around since the late 1700s. The Burlington Arcade, built in England in 1819, was in fact the inspiration behind Buffalo's Market Arcade.
On the exterior, what we have here is E.B. Green designing in the Beaux-Arts style, using that wonderful golden colored brick with marble columns flanking the entries, no expense spared. It had to seem very grand. It had to compete with the retail environment on Main Street. Terracotta ornamentation. We'll see a giant keystone is a buffalo head, so very appropriate for Buffalo, New York. This is academically precise Beaux-Arts style architecture, and it's used for a commercial purpose.
Abandoned for over 20 years, restoration work in 1995 made the Market Arcade a vital spot on Main Street once again. The Buffalo Central Terminal is another example of the way restoration work can slowly bring a pulse back to a lifeless landmark. A grand celebration inaugurated the opening of this immense Art Deco construction in 1929. But there would be little left to celebrate only a few months later, as the world experienced the Great Depression. The station never truly reached its full potential. It was built to accommodate 3,200 passengers per hour, substantially more than the dwindling number of customers. Without enough revenue, the station closed in 1979, just 50 years after its completion. The Central Terminal included a 15-story office tower, 225-foot-long main concourse, and 14 train platforms, amongst other buildings. The terminal is now under renovations to repurpose parts of the structure for a mixed-use facility, including commercial and cultural functions. Coming up, City Guides reveals Buffalo's greatest civic statement in the form of a bold Art Deco building. Fans of architecture can find plenty to admire in the city of Buffalo, from Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie House to Louis Sullivan's Guarantee Building. This eclectic array of structures represents some of the greatest visionaries of 19th and early 20th century architecture. One of the crowning landmarks in Buffalo, and certainly its grandest civic building, is its very own City Hall.
This is the explanation point, the high point, the apogee of architecture in Buffalo, one of the grand civic monuments of the United States, and certainly one of the most distinguished Art Deco civic buildings in the nation.
The design was executed by John Wade, a young and enthusiastic 33-year-old architect. His great vision for Buffalo was inspired by its status as an industrial giant. He felt that the best way to capture the optimism of the time was to employ the decorative Art Deco style. Architecturally, it was strongly influenced by geometric shapes and had a range of stylized ornaments and motifs. The structure was typically stepped and set back to create strong, bold lines.
If you look at this building, you'll see that in addition to the setbacks, which already is creating this telescopic effect, the building looks a lot higher perhaps than it is. You're getting the vertical piers, and then the spandrels are set back. So the piers are rising up, just exploding into space. It's just a spectacular structure, and the ornamentation on it is Art Deco.
The exterior pays tribute to Native American culture, the underlying theme throughout the design of City Hall. The colored tiles on the tower mimic Native American beadwork and feathered headdresses. An immense sculpted frieze rests above the main entrance, supported by 8 massive stone columns. Facing Niagara Square, it is over 11 feet high and 100 feet long. Rich imagery, symbols, and sculpted stone are plentiful throughout City Hall, making it truly a work of art.
And even the pillars behind me, they are representations of a democracy. They actually represent reeds of the Nile that, when they're standing individually, will flop back and forth, but when you bind them together like a democracy, like a city, they're strong as steel.
Buffalo City Hall has over 500,000 square feet of space it occupies, making it one of the largest city halls in the world. It's one of those public places where the fan of architecture can really enjoy themselves. One of the most striking places in Buffalo City Hall is an in-between place. It's the portico. Standing in the portico of City Hall is an awesome experience because around you is 3 floors of architecture. Above you, you see a weaving pattern and some terracotta design. You see the metalwork of the windows, and you see sculpted in the walls the frontiers people of Buffalo. So you see a farmer, a cabin builder, a basket weaver, and a hunter. 2 women, 2 men, representing the early days of Buffalo's history.
There is a high vaulted ceiling with elaborate ornamentation as you enter the dimly lit lobby. The painted Gustavino tiles are placed in patterns derived from Native American imagery. The tiles are named after Raphael Gustavino, an architect who patented the tile arch system in 1885. This style uses interlocking terracotta tiles and layers of mortar to form a thin skin. Painted murals by artist William de Leflouch Dodge accent the end of each of the 4 hallways. They represent charity, construction, protection, and education. A closer look at the construction mural reveals John Wade putting the finishing touches on City Hall.
We're not superstitious here in the city of Buffalo. We have a 13th floor and we call it 13, and on the 13th floor is our magnificent council chambers. Walking into the council chambers, one is immediately struck by the stained glass skylight. It even has a name. It's called Daybreak. This skylight fits in perfectly with the motif of the room, which is like a Greco-Roman amphitheater. So you have the pit below, or the stage. You have the audience sitting up almost like a hillside under an open sky. So everything that happens in this room is open to public scrutiny, open to the eyes of heaven.
The gallery seating is all original and still has the hat rack beneath the seat for the men's fedoras. The woodwork is all original throughout the council chambers. The interior of the doorway is the greatest example of this. Fasces are on each side of the middle doors. They are an ancient Roman symbol of authority.
The mayor's office is on the 2nd floor of City Hall, and it's a beautiful space. We have portraits in the room of all the mayors going back to 1832. The wooden doors in the mayor's office are very attractive, and you have this symbol that you see throughout City Hall, the Rosetta symbol on the doorways that we see in metal and in stone throughout the building. Something really interesting that you'll find if you look closely at the limestone walls, in the limestone are fossils that are millions of years old. So you see ancient animal life and plant life. Buffalo City Hall is like something you see in a Batman comic book. It's Gotham City. It's not Beaux-Arts. It's not classical European architecture. It is uniquely American.
It's really hard to think of a more fitting monument for a mighty industrial city on an international frontier in this age of electricity and excitement than Buffalo City Hall. A magnificent, soaring Art Deco monument for a city with major aspirations and achievements. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a better collection of architecture in a small area than exists in downtown Buffalo. From the 1880s to our City Hall here in 1932, we have a block of 50 years of architectural history which is unsurpassed in the United States.
One of Buffalo's greatest assets is its rich collection of architecture. It is a reminder of the city's past when it stood as an industrial giant. The architecture that remains to this day is a tangible manifestation of the optimism felt during those prosperous times. The current restoration of these grand structures preserves Buffalo's unique architectural identity in North America.